Hello.
Hey there.
Hey.
Hi. After the whole very carefully prepared IT check, it didn't work.
Technology always fails us. Okay, we are here. All right. So I think we're still expecting a few more people. Should we wait for a couple more minutes to let some people get in?
Let's give them another minute or two. But for all of you, though, all of you who have already joined, feel free to take the better seats. Take the ones up front, right? Take the ones that are sitting right next to the coffee. Feel free to grab those. People who are coming after you, they don't get those seats, you do. Right, Alejandro, we're at 10:05 Eastern, right? So why don't we go ahead and get started?
Sure. Let's get started. So thank you everyone for joining us today. This is our first webinar 2024. Let's hope it's not the last one. We've got lots of great things planned for this 2024, and hopefully we'll have the pleasure of having you in more of these webinars in the future. Today's webinar is a very exciting one. We have with us here today Maxwell Dashwood. I'm sure most of you know who he is, but just for if you don't know who he is, he's a very coffee shop owner, innovator, roaster, 3 times UK barista champion, and thankfully 3 times book author. He's a very well-known person in the industry, not only in the UK but all over the world, because of his great work. And I think he's better known for his publishing and his books than for anything else. So it's a pleasure to have Maxwell here today. We're going to be talking about his latest book, The Business of Specialty Coffee. I don't know if you guys have had the pleasure of reading the book or getting it. This copy. Oh, yeah, here it is. I've read it. Great book, and also have the luxury and the pleasure of contributing a little bit of our knowledge at Caravela for certain parts of the book, and it was exciting to hear from Maxwell about when I heard about his writing the book, The Business of Specialty Coffee. It was exciting for me because I think we need more of these types of books to make the industry a little bit more professional and help us navigate the challenges that we face as an industry. It's certainly a very young industry, and anything that we can do to actually elevate the industry and help it make better, I think it's a great opportunity. So thankfully we have him here today, and we also have Brian Gaffney. For those of you who don't know him, Brian Gaffney is a former management consultant. I would say retired management consultant, right, Brian?
I think once a management consultant, always a management consultant.
I was going to say recovering, right? Recovering is the way that I like to say it.
And he's been a coffee lover for a big period of his life. I do say that he's a coffee fan more than anything else. And he's one of those coffee lovers that follows some of the world's most exciting coffee farmers and the ones that are doing some of the most innovative methods out there. And we now have the pleasure at Caravela to having him as our first Chief Experience Officer, CXO. Since early 2024, he's joined the team at Caravela to help us elevate the experience both internally at Caravela and both externally for our customers and for the entire industry as well. I don't want to bore you with my talking, so I'd like to thank you, Maxwell, for accepting the invitation for this conversation, and thanks to Brian for facilitating it. And I guess I'll leave you to continue this conversation and enlighten us about all the things that you do, Maxwell, and you've written about.
Thank you very much, Alejandro.
Awesome, Alejandro, thank you for that. And thank you all for joining. I know that we all have super busy days, but I'm really excited that you all are as excited about this conversation as we are. We called it leaning into alignment because, we at Caravela are big believers in the idea that the relationship between the specialty coffee partner and the roaster is a really important one. And I also self-identify as a coffee nerd. And so when there are books that help to kind of really spell that out and make it plain, I get super excited. So I remember when Maxwell first posted about the book, or actually I learned about it through a podcast that you did. It was Chris DeFario's Keys to the Shop podcast when I first learned about it and got super excited because we are in an industry, as Alejandro just mentioned, that is pretty young and it's maturing. And so as we think about it maturing, we start thinking about what are the kinds of practices that can help to make the industry better. And I'm sure all of us, depending upon where we sit in the industry, have some idea of those. But as we start to codify some of that, right, it gets really exciting because then we can have some established best practices and then start to build on some of those. And so that is what we want to explore with Maxwell today, based on his own lived experience, as well as the research that he has done, the conversations that he has had. What are some of those practices so that as we think about, and in the context of this conversation, right, because the book really looks end to end at the industry, but as we really start thinking about the relationship between that roaster and that specialty coffee partner, what does that relationship look like? What are those expectations that exist and how do they evolve? So that's some of what we're hoping to get through today. So again, thank you for being here. For questions, please feel free to pop those into the chat. Valeria is online, so you will probably see her responding to some of those questions, but we will leave time toward the end for a live Q&A because we want to make sure that you get your questions answered. If you don't yet have a copy of the book and want one, either from the Caravela website, you can order a copy of the book. From Maxwell's website, you can also certainly order a copy of the book. Because if you haven't yet read it, hopefully this will be the primer to get you digging in directly. So with that, Maxwell, shall we get started?
Yeah, sounds great.
Awesome. So, just to open us up, now that the book has been in the wild for a few months, how does it feel? What is your reaction? What are some of the reactions that you've been seeing about or hearing from either in person or on social?
Yeah, it's been very rewarding for me. There's something really nice about publishing. It doesn't just have to be a book. It could be content. You could write, you could do a small video, you could give a talk. But in the lead up to any kind of publishing event, you obviously are looking to do your research and thinking really hard about how you want to articulate your ideas. And then you actually put it out there and you see what comes back, So when I published it, and the day it was printed and going out, people said, "Oh, you must be so happy." And I was like, "Well, it's great." But really, now I'm waiting for people to read it and actually digest it and see what they think. And it's been really rewarding because I think it's clear that a lot of people care about this topic. And even though the topic isn't necessarily at the forefront because it might not be as romantic as some of the other narratives, it's clearly very important to everybody in coffee. And for all of us, we are in the business of coffee and we're trying to marry up those two things, a passion for coffee. It could be a particular narrative. It could be about experience, could be about cup quality, but we've got some vision we're trying to achieve with coffee. And we can't do that unless we make it work as a business. And it's been really fascinating to keep learning, right? Someone else needs to be admitted. To keep learning. And this is not, I said to people when I wrote this book, it's not supposed to be the Bible on the business of coffee. I'm very clear at the beginning of the book about the limitations of trying to cover such a huge topic in one book, but it's really about trying to improve the conversation. And so being invited onto webinars like this is exactly what I was hoping to achieve with the book. And it's great for me. I keep learning all the time.
Love that, Maxwell. Well, one, mission accomplished. And again, congratulations. But also, I think it's interesting. You mentioned, right, kind of the romance, and then you mentioned marriage. And often I think a lot of times when you're trying to working to build a really healthy relationship, there is both a romantic side and then there's a practical side, right? And you need both of those things. And I think, quite frankly, as the specialty coffee industry continues to evolve in some of those practical matters and processes and procedures, then the opportunity for the romance to thrive gets even healthier, right? Because then we have some of those basics covered. So the things that drive that passion, we can lean into even more.
Well, I absolutely agree. I think there's often a misconception that these two things are mutually exclusive, that you either do something that is passionate, creative, romantic, and has those kind of values, or you run a business that's profitable. And it's sort of saying, well, actually, so I come from an art background. My father's a sculptor, and my first real profession was portraiture. And there is this sweet spot of like, how do you build, your values into your business model so they benefit each other? And over time, as every year goes by, you're getting to do more of both, not having to sacrifice one for the other.
Love that. So Ian, so let's, as we established in your bio, so we know you're a coffee shop owner, professional competitor, right? Successfully done so, researcher and writer. For this particular topic around the business of specialty coffee, tell us a little bit about your journey to getting to the questions that drove it, and then ultimately what took the idea from getting from a thought to you actually sitting down and starting to get through the writing and the planning of the book.
Sure. So if we go back to the beginning, when I got into coffee, I think I'm like a lot of people drawn to coffee, I'm a curious type of person. And that's part of the draw, this complexity of trying to understand coffee, and it's magical and interesting, but also frustrating. And there's so many different factors to consider. That was a big draw for me. And in the early years, I got into coffee back in about 2007. I was exploring, just trying to understand the drink. And then obviously one of the ways for me to do that was to start my own businesses as an entrepreneur, which allowed me to explore the drink in the way I wanted to with my businesses. However, over time, I noticed that the more I wanted to explore ideas in coffee, the more I had to, or was forced to, think about the business of coffee, right? And then I think in the specialty end, the pointy end, or the boutique end, there's a lot of precedent. There's loads of coffee businesses out there, and there's an assumption that it will just work at some point. And maybe this isn't just coffee, but in the early years of entrepreneurship, you're just grafting. You're just, you and a couple of other people probably are just working really hard. And I think if I went back in time, I would definitely do things differently if me now could speak to me at the beginning. But when this book started I've been in coffee quite a long time. I've been curious about business for a long time. I took on investment in 2017. So I've worked with stakeholders who are much more business focused in their thinking, about trying to grow a business or trying to have bottom line profit, etc. And I was looking around the coffee industry, and I knew the struggles I was having with my own personal projects to make them profitable. So like, how do I achieve what we want to as a brand and also make it profitable? And I would look around, and I was trying to figure out the other businesses. It's a great way to learn is to benchmark and reference. And quite frankly, a lot of the narrative I heard didn't make sense, right? And so I think a lot of how we think about business of coffee is often driven by marketing from coffee brands who say, hey, this is how the coffee industry works, and this is what we do as a brand and why you should buy from us. And obviously that's very biased, right? Because it's a sales pitch, it's a marketing pitch. And so this book was, I set the task of this book so that I could really become sort of an investigative journalist for several months, trying to really understand the industry in a way that I hadn't before. And so I started going around and talking to people, obviously using data where I could get it in different sources. But so much of the industry is private business that it's quite hard to dig in and find those things out. And one of the main things that I utilized is this idea of expert foiling, which is where you go and study it, learn as much as you can about it, then find, experienced professionals or experts, and you basically tell them about how they work. As in, most people get a bit annoyed when you do this. They're like, don't tell me how to run my business. But that technique works very well because they very quickly tell you where you're correct or where you're wrong. And I think I said to someone, I was talking about another idea for a book about, going down into the minutiae of being a professional in coffee. And they said, well, yeah, your current book is more of a meta-analysis. And that's what this is. It's trying to say, okay, if we zoom out and we look at the industry as a whole, how's it kind of working? And that was really what inspired me to write the book. And the book started off as about a 40,000 word book, just about specific economics of the coffee supply chain. But then you realize you can't talk about those specifics without providing wider context. And when I was saying to people that I was writing this book, they would often say to me, no, you couldn't possibly write a book about it. It's too complicated, which obviously annoyed me. I was like, but I built that into the book to say, okay, it is all about context. You cannot compare directly an Ethiopian smallholder farmer growing coffee on government land with a large estate owner in Latin America. But what you can say is they're both growing coffee. there is, inputs and outputs. And in the book, I call these the levers. And if we can understand the levers of business throughout the whole supply chain, from growing coffee all the way through making coffee in a cafe or retailing coffee, we can take those levers and apply them to a given context to understand every business in the supply chain.
Love that. And it's quite the undertaking. And also, I can only imagine, as you're talking about that expert foiling, I can only imagine some of the conversations and some of the facial expressions that you must have seen as you were having some of those conversations. So, but again, clearly they resulted in some wonderful insight. So thank you for putting yourself in that situation. And then the last question before we really start getting into this relationship between the roaster and the green coffee partner, Maxwell, for you, I think, what was the thing that, and I know that admittedly it's one of those difficult and I'm sure annoying interviewer questions, but what is the thing that most surprised you the most, or that you were shocked to learn as you were going through, that it was the thing that you maybe least expected you might uncover as you were working on the book?
I mean, maybe not least expected, because I think I'm quite open-minded, but I think one of the things that clarified in my brain as I wrote the book was the value of commercial coffee as well as specialty coffee. I think that was a strong thought I had as I wrote the book that evolved over time. And then obviously one of the most surprising things, I think, which I had an inkling of, but studying it properly, was it's funny I'm doing this interview with you, because one of the hardest places to make money in the supply chain is actually green importing. So I think, this assumption that everybody has that somewhere in the supply chain there's a lot of profit being made is, it's quite a competitive, lean, like balanced, if you like. I mean, that probably sounds too positive, but this global industry that does distribute competitive pricing throughout, and I think it's a lot of things make sense, especially around green importing and the fact that you do need to be at scale. And I think that was one of the biggest focuses of the book is, scale just means, a relative term of size. You could have small scale or large scale. And obviously the scale of Nestle is very different to the scale of my business, but understanding scale is key to whatever it is you're trying to do in a coffee business. But it's these ideas, I think, these fundamental ideas of the way the supply chain works, how value is distributed throughout that supply chain, and scale, and also the fact that specialty coffee does reward this concept of quality and the value that creates, but that there is still important value in commercial coffee.
Got it. Cool. Okay. So let's jump in and talking about scale, right? As we think about taking you back to the beginning of, the Kelowna Coffee Roastery, 2015, you're getting started. At that moment, right? And I'm assuming, as I kind of just look at some of the names that we've probably got people joining us at various places within that scale spectrum in coffee, right? We probably have some very small roasters and potentially some larger ones as well. But if we go back to 2015 for you, when you were thinking about green coffee, what were those initial thoughts, Maxwell, and kind of what were your expectations of your the green coffee partners with whom you were working or looking out to start working with?
Well, I think you have to understand the conversation about supply chain relative to what you're trying to do. So this idea of a one size fits all seemed, even back then, seemed kind of odd to me. I knew what I wanted, which was I wanted these great high scoring coffees. I wanted an element of exclusivity. I wanted them financed. I wanted support on them. Obviously, if I'm being fully from my business position, I want my risk managed. I want a lot, basically. And I went out and I thought, okay, obviously there's a lot of conversation about direct trade or this idea of sourcing your own coffee. I knew I wanted quite a lot of variety, so it didn't seem like it made sense if we were having subscriber coffees that change every month that I was going to get all of those through these sort of long-term relationships, so to speak, but that we could maybe do that with some of our core products, if you like. And so I went out and I visited different countries: Kenya, Ethiopia, Brazil, El Salvador, Colombia. And one thing that became very clear to me was that unless I'm going to be out in the field all the time, I'm actually at a disadvantage as a very small operator to source coffee. I'm not around the world all the time. So it was my decision after a year of traveling that I'm not going to do as much traveling for Origin, no matter how much I enjoyed it and how interesting it was, but I'm going to leverage the supply chains that are in place. And actually that's what I started doing. And I started going, well, what coffee do I want who's the best partner to get that for me. And probably over time we ended up in a place where, quite frankly, we had too many partners and too much complexity. But that was sort of the route that we took back then, and sort of evolved over the coming years. Yeah.
And how has and over the years, right, as we think about it, because it's been almost 10 years now, but how have the expectations evolved, Maxwell? How have the relationships evolved? Your expectations, the way that you partner, right? If we think about now that you've been doing this for nearly a decade, how would you say that you build those partnerships today versus you did back then?
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, your business evolves and changes, right? And I think I say this for every business anywhere working with, doesn't have to be coffee, doesn't matter where you are in the supply chain, is that you're trying to find a fit or a match, right? Which is that you're valuable to the supplier and the supplier is valuable to the client. So, you often see smaller operators partnering with smaller suppliers, for example. I think as we've evolved in, size, we're obviously a lot bigger than we were then. That growth from our side has come from us supplying roasted coffee to different types of clients than at the beginning. And that means those clients, if I'm going to go into catering or get some coffee into grocery or partner up on a collab to supply restaurants, nearly always I need better finance and a longer distribution of risk. So I need to be able to have better payment terms on my coffee, longer financing. And I also need to be in a position to commit to a flavor profile over time. Whereas at the beginning, when I'm just buying whatever coffee interests me that month and sticking it online for my subscribers, there's a ton of flexibility there, right? I don't have to deliver the same product or profile month in, month out. And I also don't need, a lot of commercial structure in place because it's all very straightforward. So I think I think about coffee a lot more, quote unquote, commercially in terms of what I need from my partners than I did back then. And the conversations, obviously, quality and cut profile is still paramount, but there's many more commercial considerations than when we started.
Okay. And then as we then use that to project then into the work, into the research, I'll ask these questions together and then kind of invite you to approach them however you like. But then, based upon the conversations and the discussions you were having, where do you see opportunities again in this particular aspect of the value chain, either with exporters and importers working with the green coffee, working with their roaster customers, and roaster customers looking for really good green coffee partners. Where do you see each party, right, on the green coffee side as well as on the roaster side? Where are they underserving that relationship on both? And then where do you see opportunities to super serve that relationship, right? What are some of the things that roasters may be able to ask, their green coffee partners to increase the value of that relationship that may not be happening today in broad practice? And at the same time, how can green coffee partners, better articulate the value, provide better value so that they're seen as a stronger partner as with their roaster customers, as opposed to simply, the green coffee vendor?
Yeah, I think the value that an established, strong supply chain in coffee is being made clear right now with the EU anti-deforestation legislation, right? Which is saying, okay, there's now going to be this onus put at the point of import into the UK and Europe that coffee has to prove that it wasn't grown on deforested land that wasn't deforested before 2020. And, there is a bunch of compliance in place that's required for that. And you need the resource and infrastructure to do that. And obviously, I think that's the example here, which is this is a global supply chain and working with partners who understand that. It clearly, that the value becomes very, very clear, right? And then it doesn't just have to be anti-deforestation legislation. It could be anything else you want to achieve with your supply chain. It's about having the resource and the capabilities to do so, but also recognizing the limitations of a given supply chain, right? So we talked a bit there about my business, and I've always felt this with my cafes, got 2 cafes now, and all the projects I've done is, this is a big industry and there are multiple ways to do something. And I'm exploring my vision and ideas of what I would like to do with coffee. And I'm tapping into different partners and different relationships to do that. By no way is the way I want to do things a blueprint for every company, and clearly I've done a lot of consultancy over the year, and you'll know this from your recovering management consultancy, is that you can't just look at a business and tell them what they need to do. You need to get into the business and understand it, and go, well, what is it really like? There's a lot of stuff in this book at the beginning, which is the boring business stuff, right? It's the, deliverable margin. Like, okay, you've got hundreds of clients, but which ones are actually profitable, which ones aren't, which ones are like draining from your resource. And I think it's the same in terms of that partnership throughout the supply chain, is going, okay, what's in it for you? What's in it for us? And you need a quid pro quo relationship, right? There was one point in the book where I touch on this formal relations contract, which I think it was in the Harvard Business Review. And it's this idea that whatever deal you do today, we live in a market with so many moving pieces, that deal might not be the right deal in 6 to 12 months time, right? So I think whether you're very large or small, that open understanding of each other's position is key to having an ongoing sustainable relationship. And I often think that when I see from somewhere like the UK, the way we look back upstream, so if we're downstream with our roasteries and coffee shop and we look upstream to coffee farming, there's often an oversimplification of that story and a lack of understanding of the businesses in the supply chain. And so I think roasters need to better understand the supply chain they're taking part in and what it means for them to be a client in that position. And I actually believe these established, well-resourced partners are able to help the roaster understand that. I think that's where they can really help them learn about the industry they're taking part in. And obviously at the same time, reduce the risk and improve quality and tell a better story and improve compliance. So I think it's very easy when we put coffee in a bag to feel like we did it all as the roaster, right? But we're really on the shoulders of giants. And I think it's about making the most of that supply chain. But we need to understand it to know what we need from our partners, right?
Agreed. And then to that point about needing to understand it, I think this is where there's likely opportunity for the green coffee partner, to be able to build the trust with the roaster, to be able to have some of those conversations, right? So that it's not simply transactional, but it is relationship based. And so again, here, based on the conversations that you've had and the research that you've done, again, examples of ways that trust can be built or made stronger between the roaster and the green coffee partner, so that some of these conversations can be had, right? So it's not necessarily, right, what's on spot right now, or what do you need in the next 6 months, but you're starting to really, where the roaster trusts that green coffee partner enough to be able to kind of share the perspective and the vision, so that those, again, higher value conversations around those business needs based on growth, based on market, based on customer demographics, based on the roaster's distribution channels, but those conversations start to increase in size.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the openness needs to be, I think the roaster needs to utilize the knowledge of their partners to understand the way the market works, so they can better understand what their options are and what a good relationship looks like. I'll give you an example: is the frost in Brazil and the increased prices, right? There's two different ways to react to that. There's, oh my God, these prices are suddenly very high. And then just to go to all the different green partners and say, this is the price I need, who's going to give it to me, right? Which is like a very aggressive, competition-based approach to it. It doesn't really show an understanding of the way, the market is playing out. And the only way you're going to get coffee that cheap in that scenario is you're going to get some coffee that was contracted earlier, or you're going to get the green partner selling you the coffee at a loss with the hope that the market comes back down and they can make it later on. But my point sort of being is that I often think coffee brands, roasters, very much oversimplify what it means to do business from an agricultural level and then through a finance and logistics level. So in the book, I say, look, this is the supply chain of coffee. We've got some industries here that are very well known, that they're not anything to do with coffee. They're just types of industries of which coffee touches, right? So agriculture, finance and logistics, food manufacturing, which is your coffee brands, your roasters, hospitality and retail. So these are the industries we're working in, and we look at other industries that are not coffee, we can better understand what that does mean for coffee, right? But I think in there, I think it's up to a green partner to challenge a roaster's, which is, I would say, especially in this sort of young romantic narrative, is a naive understanding of what coffee farming is and isn't. So what I mean by that is there's a romantic story to tell, but actually it's, you know, there's a lot of these well-meaning. I was speaking to a coffee brand who said they have people for them making, you know, the right decisions for the wrong reasons. So what they're saying is these sound nice on paper and they sound good on a marketing pitch, but they actually don't represent the reality of doing business further upstream in the supply chain. So by that I might mean that, you know, having a range of customers, you know, to spread that risk. This idea of saying, oh, I bought all of that lot, you know, is that a good or a bad thing? What was the volume? And understanding price relative to volume. You know, for me, a coffee farmer or a producer, everyone, I try and think about it as if it was my own business, right? So I sell, for example, you know, a geisha lot from Esmeralda, £50 a bag, and I would forgive my customers for them assuming that's my most profitable product when it isn't, right? It's very small scale, it is high price, but a lot goes into it, and actually it doesn't deliver much profit. And actually it's those volume coffees at a good price that are actually delivering that profit. And I'm giving it's these examples because I think it's the coffee roasters and brands need to understand the mechanics of how to run a sustainable business throughout the supply chain to understand what it is, what a good relationship with a supplier looks like.
Yeah, I love that. And quite frankly, I love that both from my business mind loves that, but I also appreciate it as being, you know, as part of the Caravela team, because really, quite frankly, that's the role that we want to play. And I'm sure that's a number of, and not just us, right? I'm sure a number of our peers in the industry, right? That is the role that we want to play. But, you know, and I think for us, it's trying to find ways to have that kind of conversation with our customers so that they don't feel like we're overreaching, but really it's really trying to figure out a way that as we better understand your business structure, your business model, again, your distribution channels, your cost structure.
Well, I was going to say that when we all set up a business, we should, if we don't, we should have an idea of who our customer is, right? And for a lot of us, the customer's just us, right? We just make for all of the smaller businesses, we just make a business because we want something, right? And that's fine. But what I'm trying to say here is when you say, okay, our customer is X, you start building a business to supply to X, okay? And you build a structure around X. Now, you may also be able to supply Y well, but it might be that Z is not your, you know, you haven't set your business up to supply Z. So I think it's about, that's a capabilities conversation, right? For any business in any field, these are our core capabilities, which means this is why we're the best partner for you. And if those are not your core capabilities and the client needs something else, then maybe you aren't going to be the best partner. And we're all exploring this all the time in our businesses, going, okay, well, we could sell to that client, but we would have to do X, Y, and Z. Is that what we're about, right? So I think it's about knowing your limitations, knowing your focus, and you know, you always, I say this at the customer service end, I learned this from cafes, you know, when someone walks through the door, if they're not my customer, like, you know, they're not going to have an amazing experience and I'm not going to deliver on their expectation. So I think a lot of it is about delivering on expectation. When we have poor relationships in business is when there's misaligned expectation, right? And I think that education in a complex market like coffee is where we need to make sure that there are aligned expectations.
I love that. I love that because again, that's where you go, right? Yes, this is a good match or it isn't, right? And where it's not a good match, right? That's not necessarily a problem, right? Because everybody, right? To your point, every customer is not for every business, and so as both the customer, you're in need of services, right? And the customer providing services, you best understand your needs and your offering. You can more quickly figure out, hey, is this the right connection for us? And then, so speaking of connection, then also wanting to talk a little bit about the idea of, you know, as a roaster thinks about their customer, right? And again, now we're talking potentially wholesale, we're talking retail. Retail could be physical cafe, retail could be online, it could be a hybrid. You know, and again, based on learnings, research, lived experience, you know, how can the green coffee partners and other roasters how can roasters look to the green coffee partner to help them provide that value to the end customer? right? Because again, like what we realize is that, again, I've lived the majority of my life in coffee as an end consumer. And ultimately, my willingness to pay the cup, right, when I step into the cafe or I buy the bag online, is ultimately what drives willingness to pay for everyone else upstream. And I've heard that, right, sometimes being able to tell the customer and explain to the customer, right, kind of why that cost is what it is, right? Why that cup of coffee is not $1.50 is a challenge. And just again, from your journey, any thoughts about how the role that the Green Coffee Partner can play in supporting the roaster to help tell that story to the end consumer?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I have a few thoughts there. I mean, the first one is this, cup quality and scoring is obviously very big in the coffee industry. In fact, it's very big for the whole supply chain, and then it gets to the roaster and it kind of just stops, right? So like before that, everybody's doing a deal based on the cup score. And then once the roaster's got it and it goes out to the wholesaler, the retailer, there's no cup score really. I know some people stick it on a bag, but I think it's interesting how rigidly that scoring is used to value coffee. And very much there is a commoditization piece there. This is a product of this spec and it's worth this value. But what's clear, what we understand about the way people engage in coffee, and this whole, in the book, I say, well, I'm calling it boutique specialty rather than just specialty, right? Because specialty of a certain grade of coffee can go anywhere. It can go into a very large company. It can go into a small boutique company telling, a story and a narrative or an experience. So that's just one part of this value proposition of what we call specialty or boutique or third wave. And it's very clear that the story, the narrative, the value is not just, there's this much quality in the cup. It does matter, where the coffee came from, its origins, its journey. That is important to people, and it is playing into value, not just to the end consumer, but primarily I think the value is actually a little bit further upstream with green buyers, roasters, baristas, and they then almost evangelize that to the end consumer, right? Obviously, post-COVID, we've got a lot more educated consumers than ever, because actually turns out when people were given a bit of time to sit at home, they did want to like really dig into coffee and learn about it. And I think there's so many more educated consumers out there. But once you start to think about the branding narrative of it, and obviously scarcity is a thing, like this story of a certain product that came from a certain location, whether some people do or don't like the term terroir, or whether it was a certain cultivar with a certain processing technique, either yeast or fermentation or whatever it was, there's a lot of value of the story of this particular thing that you're about to experience. And it's not necessarily, sometimes I think people like yourselves or other people in the middle of the supply chain feel a little bit overlooked, right? Because you're doing all this incredible work, but no one wants to tell your story, right? So everyone wants to tell this, but that's natural, because actually that complicates it and muddies the water. It's a very strong narrative of, I'm a roaster in the UK, I'm passionate about coffee, this is where the coffee came from, this is the producer, this is the farmer, and that is the story to tell. I also think we're moving more towards that story, since, because also I think brewing is a bit of a conflict for this story, as in, if you're going to talk about how to grind it or what water science to use, I truly believe that your average consumer has only got the bandwidth for one narrative. And so what narrative are you as a coffee brand going to share with them? Obviously, I have more than one customer type. One of them wants to talk about grinding. The other one really wants to say, hey, I really enjoyed this coffee I had from Brazil. Why was it different to the other coffees I had from Brazil? But right. I think, the people, I'm pleased that since I launched the book, green traders and exporters, importers have said, thank you for doing the research and representing sort of what we do and the value we bring. But also, I think when you go out to your original question is, how does the coffee brand or the retailer maximize that relationship? It is for the green trader to help them tell that story about the coffee, right? I think from a marketing point of view, it's like, how do we talk about the people who are involved in the relationships? Because that's another theme from the book. It really is a people industry. That the whole thing, not just the marketing, but it's all about people and relationships all the way through the supply chain. And I think allowing us to connect with the people who are involved in the supply chain and tell that story is a key benefit that we can get by working with the right partner.
I appreciate that. And in particular, and I know this is a conversation that we've had within Caravela quite a bit, but I think, for us, it's less about, I think, our story being told, but more about as our customers understand the value that we can help them tell the particular narrative that they need, right? Because we have access to the information, because we have access to the producers, through our producer education program, or through a lot of the sustainability and the carbon footprint work that we're doing. So I think, like, for us in particular, right, and in this case, speaking for Caravela, not so much for the industry, it is the idea that there's a lot of information that we'd like to make available to you that can be valuable. And it's really wanting to find partners that find that either it's the data, the analysis, finding that as valuable as the coffee.
Yeah, I think that one's a bit of a two-way street, which is the roaster today, if you asked it what it wants to tell its customers, it would say, I want to tell them X, Y, Z, right? But then the roaster isn't really that deep into the supply chain. So there'll be things that are happening, which then they get presented with by the green partner, right? You say, okay, this is what's happening. We're doing these things. And so it goes both ways. It's not just the roaster saying, hey, please find this information for me. It's being like, well, absolutely, we can or we can't get that information for this reason. But then the other way of saying, actually, this is really important in this particular region, or we're focusing heavily on this because this is where the value is, and sharing that back downstream. And it's for the roaster to receive that and decide how they filter that through to their customers. So I think it's a two-way street.
Well, agree. And I think, quite frankly, even the whole notion of two-way, I think there's so much in so many aspects of the value chain. There's so many opportunities for more two-way streets, right? So that there's just greater communication up and down. So I know that we're right at 15 of the hour, and so I'm going to kind of ask everybody who's been with us again. Please, if you have some questions, drop those in, because we want to be able to take those in just a moment. But Maxwell, kind of then last two questions I'll kind of toss out there to you, and I'll bundle them. One is, if you'd had another 6 months or so to keep working on the project, what do you think you might have continued? And I know that the book ends with some kind of future focused questions, which is great. To your point, is this project is not the end, but if you had 6 more months, what might you have focused on? And then the other part of that one is, now that you know what you know, because you were that investigative journalist, what parts of the value chain still kind of frustrate you and challenge you, that you're still working on?
I mean, yes. So, sorry, just hard to bundle those two together directly. I think I'll actually start with the second one, because the market, the coffee market apart from a few specific companies, there's not a lot of intellectual property, right? So from a pure business point of view, if I'm looking at coffee, that makes it challenging. Any industry where there isn't intellectual property means that it's really just a pretty open market. I mean, of course, there are specific examples around the world where it is quite regulated for whatever reason, whether it's coffee farming or import into certain countries, heavily taxing coffee. But in general, it's quite open. And although that has lots of benefits, what that naturally does is reduces everything to the lowest competitive price, right? So it's why it's why a lot of green companies are based in Switzerland, to have access to the lowest cost debt, because you go, okay, well, this is a game of finance, so you know what, we're just going to lose if we don't have access to reasonably priced finance, right? And so I think the leanness of the industry is definitely a challenge, and I guess that's a frustration. And right back to the beginning of the conversation, which is, okay, so making money in any industry is also a matter of perspective. So it's all about where you came from and what you expect in return for the business you run or the employment you have. So my example would be speaking to a producer who comes from a well-resourced, wealthy family in Latin America, who has, went to school, a good school in America, got an MBA, and they're looking at the family business and thinking, okay, I can go into finance, I can go elsewhere. Oh, I'm going to go into coffee. Okay, this needs to be quite profitable to work for me. So actually, when I talk to those individuals, they're thinking about agritourism, thinking about, having their own coffee brands in country, whether it's roasters or cafes. But versus, let's say in the UK, someone's a waiter or a barista and they're going to have their own cafe, and having their own cafe can generate more living for them than working as a barista, but nothing compared to the finance job, for example. So there's definitely some context here, which is with this book, people look at it and go, oh, some people read it and be like, oh, it's pretty negative. Other people look at it and go, oh, it's really inspiring. And I think that just depends what it is you're expecting from working in coffee, right? There's a famous saying that, if you were going to go and make loads of money, you wouldn't choose to work in coffee, right? That doesn't mean that there are not great, rewarding businesses in coffee, and potentially more rewarding than many other fields. But I do believe you have to work really hard. You cannot, I think if you're going to work in coffee at any level, it is so competitive. There's very little IP. And then when you have floods of VC money or private equity, that makes it even harder because these companies are willing to run at a loss, right? And I definitely think, to your first question, that's one of the things I study a bit more. I touch on VC and private equity and funding in the book. And, as soon as I wrote the book, then there was the acquisition of La Colombe. Well, first of all, they got the Keurig Dr. Pepper money and then got bought completely. And so I would call that a unicorn business, which is fascinating to look at, but probably not a blueprint for you to base your business on because it's very unlikely. And really what I'm talking about here is the theme I have in the book of like, what is a good business, right? Because a unicorn is exciting. We love to talk about it. It's on a podcast, but they happen hardly ever. They're very high risk. There's another, I forgot, an economic thinker who says you have to look at the graveyard, right? Which is how many businesses were around this unicorn that had the same strategy and failed, because these strategies are high risk strategies. So one of my themes is like, what does a good business look like? A profitable, sustainable, good business. And I think I would have looked into that even more if I had more time, right? And I think it's something that I'm continuing to think about, having written the book. But I think there is, at the beginning, I say, look, you don't have to compromise vision for business, but you cannot pursue vision without caring about business at all. And I think it does frustrate me how. I say frustrate me personally. I mean, I'm talking to people and I'm almost feeling for them. Like, you're really going to need to make business a priority for you, because it'd be a shame to see your passion become something that you actually resent because the business became so burdensome, right? So I think that's really, this takes us right back to the beginning, is that maturation of the market, the professionalization of this industry, which is, it is an industry, it is a business, and we need to embrace professionalism as much as we do, the sort of passion side of great coffee.
Right. And we can do that we can embrace that professionalism and not sacrifice the fun, right? We can still enjoy it. We still have the passion and the romance, and maybe even more so by putting some of that structure in place that helps us maximize, the operation of the business.
Well, I think, innovation, for example, right now I'm sat up in Yorkshire in the UK. It's an innovation project I work on, and we've spent all morning testing a coffee grinder, right? But there's obviously an R&D budget here. And I think, this is what a lot of us don't build into coffee, is especially at the creative end where we're trying to do interesting things. And I say at the end of the book, try and build in the budget, the sustainability and the profitability to do the things you don't even know about yet. You haven't even had the ideas for. And right. I think we often build budgets of, right, okay, I'm going to sell a cup of coffee and I'm going to make this much net profit, but it doesn't consider the ongoing resource you need to be creative, dynamic, innovative. And so I think when we look at business models, we need to think about that, right? Which is, somebody will have a light bulb moment and be like, oh, wouldn't it be amazing if we could do this with the supply chain? And that will nearly always require investment, right? So the long-term view on a business is making sure that you actually develop the budget to be explorative.
I think I hear you saying that, a business model and a budget, those are not bad words.
That is what you hear, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So, and I know we got just a few minutes left, but I want to give folks an opportunity to check in, and Valeria, check in with you to see if we have any questions we want to address, or if folks want to just kind of take themselves off mute and kind of just ask the question live. Feel free to introduce yourself and do that. Perfect. So I've got one I'm going to read from Gianluca, who says, "Hi, Maxwell. What do you do to keep your passion up for high quality coffee, but also being competitive with your wholesale customers?"
Yeah, so it's a good question. So really, I mean, I think that has to be relative to what we talked about before, like who the customer is, right? So you say a wholesale customer. I presume what you're suggesting there is in a competitive market, there is a real squeeze on price, and I'm competing against other roasters, and the temptation there is to reduce quality, right? And I think again, it depends like how firm you want to stand on this. Cost of living has gone up. You know, all of the costs of running a coffee business have gone up. And when we saw the price rise of green coffee with the frosts, and the resulting market bounce, what we saw in the UK market was a lot of companies didn't flow all of that through to the consumer, right? They said they prioritized availability over profitability, which means we want to make sure our customers still buy from us, and actually we'll take a little less profit in the meantime. And I think in a market where all the prices are squeezed, you have to, if you're going to maintain quality without losing all your customers, you probably are going to say, well, yeah, we need to take a medium-term view on this, and we say, look, this is the economic climate. We are not going to be as profitable. Each company needs to have its range there. Like, you know, if you're running so close to the bone, as a British saying, but if you're running so close with very little profit, you have no room to prioritize availability over profitability, and you would probably just have to lower the quality of the coffee going into the blend, right? So again, I think a business that, you know, has a bit more buffer and a bit more profitability can play around with these things. But I think that really comes back to marketing, which is, you know, at the beginning of this, I think we talked a little bit there about, you know, cup quality versus narrative, story, and marketing. A lot of people don't like this idea that so much of coffee is about branding, but of course it is, because, so I say this, which is, if the specialty market is, or the quality boutique market is going to be big, right, then that means the majority of people drinking it do not self-identify as experts. And that's not because they can't become an expert, it's because they're busy leading their life, right? They're like, they have a job or they're learning about other things. And it asks a lot of the customer to learn about coffee quality. The reason I'm telling this is because people want quality coffee, but they're not necessarily going to go and become an expert to decide for themselves, which is where they need to trust. They need to trust brands, they need to trust people. And so I think for me and my brand, I've spent years building up the trust that we as a brand, you know, do have a very low compromise approach to quality, as in we don't compromise on it, is what I mean by that. And that they can trust us as a brand, and that we have a lot of integrity. And that's what allows us, I think, to maintain those prices. I do think in a highly competitive market where there's a lot of loss leaders coming in, you are potentially going to lose some of those clients. But I think for us, you were going to lose them anyway. And I do believe that, I think I said it before about relationships. This is a people-driven industry, and relationships are very, very strong. Your product needs to be great as well. But I focus on the integrity of our brand, making sure we stay relevant as a brand. How do we go from being a new brand to being established? And long term, I want to be a heritage brand. I don't know when I get there, whether that's 20 years or 30 years, whilst also building really strong relationships with my customers. So I think these are kind of very sort of timeless things. There's no real gimmick there, but I think those are the things that we focus on.
Awesome. So thank you for the response. Gianluca, thank you so much for the question. And Gianluca also just acknowledges that he agrees, right? It is a lot about the branding, and he acknowledges the inspiration, you know, that you're providing. You know, I think to acknowledge his point, I think rarely do you have someone who becomes knowledgeable about something, but they don't lose the passion. So the way you present the information just kind of continues to stoke that fire in the rest of us to be better in whatever we do in coffee, right? To bring that same energy and enthusiasm.
I was going to say about enthusiasm, I had to explain this to a barista the other day, because we opened our new shop in London 6 months ago, and we do a bunch of things, you know, all of it's done for a reason. Like we do turbo shots, we use softer water for the filter bar, harder water for the espresso bar, all of these decisions that have been made over time around quality. And I think when they come to work for us, they see some exciting new things, right? But although there's a lot of novelty and newness in coffee, and there's clearly a desire for this, for trend and new ways to do things, there's also a parallel journey happening here, which is like quality over time. You know, this is a very old idea of like, you know, owning a bakery and making the best croissants every day, day in, day out for 20, 30 years. And this is something for me that specialty coffee, you know, that's something that I think is an important part of the industry. It's not just about the new all the time. It's about actually delivering on quality every single day. And I think that's where my passion comes from, is this idea of making something spectacular every single day. I find that, you know, it's a challenge, but it's one that I'm excited about. And I think if you're only excited about exploring new shiny things in coffee, you're probably going to be in it for 4 or 5 years and get out. But there's this, as we go, we've had this sort of explosion, this subculture of focusing on coffee as a culinary drink that is now, you know, become much more than a subculture. And I think long term is about saying, okay, whether it's like wine or something else, is this idea of quality over time, I think is very valuable. It's not just about doing something new and shiny or different. It's about delivering quality year in, year out. And I think that that is difficult to do. Like, I speak to a lot of people in coffee about this. That's much harder to do than, you know, people might think. And I think that should be a real focus for quality driven brands, is quality over time.
Well, Max, I have to tell you, I think that was a beautiful closing remark. I had a question, but I think the way that you just landed that plane was perfect. So again, Maxwell, thank you so much for the time, the insight, the generosity of your experience and your research. To everyone who stayed with us, I really appreciate, you know, your clearly what you have is curiosity and passion and commitment to this industry, which is why you're with us. So thank you all so much. Please, if you haven't yet picked up the book, please make sure that you do. No matter what you do next, have a great cup of coffee. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. We'll talk soon. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.